Hey everybody, this is TJR, and it's time to talk about the latest album by The Who that was released last weekend entitled simply Who. But first, if you like what I'm doing here, please remember to click like, click subscribe, and be sure to smash the bell icon so you can know when I release new videos. If you want to help me make more videos, please consider going to the Patreon page and donating whenever you can. When The Who released Endless Wire back in 2006, it was the first album to not feature bassist John Entwistle, who sadly had passed away. And at that point, it had been roughly 24 years since The Who's last studio album, entitled It's Hard. Also missing in action on Endless Wire was drummer Kenny Jones, who replaced Keith Moon as an official member on the albums Face Dances and It's Hard. Sometimes a band will have to change its members. Someone leaves, someone passes away, but I still consider it to be that band if they replace them with an official member versus a hired gun. I can't be 100% certain about this, but it felt to me like Kenny Jones was an official replacement and not a hired gun for The Who's last two albums, so I still considered it to be The Who. But with Endless Wire, it was just Townshend and Daltrey. Now, true, some people might argue, Daltrey's voice, Pete Townshend's songwriting, that's the primary voice of The Who. But without that rhythm section of Keith Moon and Entwistle, and then of course later Entwistle and Kenny Jones, I thought this really isn't The Who, it's Daltrey and Townshend. They really shouldn't call it The Who, they should call it Daltrey and Townshend. But I also understood that if they didn't call it The Who, they wouldn't sell as many copies. The plus side to calling it The Who was that they would sell more albums, but the downside is that they will now be compared to previous Who albums, and after so much time, they will be compared to the very best Who albums. As I recall, reaction to Endless Wire was fairly tepid. No one called it really a bad album, but nobody was really saying that it was a great album, and certainly nobody was saying that it was a great Who album. There were definitely songs that I enjoyed off that album, but it lacked a certain exuberance. It lacked a certain amount of youthful rage. And for me, Who albums were always a combination of youthful rage punctuated by moments of very sincere introspection. It was like two sides of a personality that were always at war with each other. My memory of Endless Wire is that it was mostly serious introspection. Nothing wrong with that, but it just didn't really feel like a Who album. 13 years later, with the release of Who, I'm happy to say that this album succeeds in many respects where 2006's Endless Wire did not. And while I still don't think you can call this The Who, this album definitely comes closer to sounding like The Who than Endless Wire did. Like I said earlier, for me, The Who, their albums were always this conflict between youthful rage and serious introspection. And this album definitely manages to pull that off for the most part. Now, initially before the album's release, there were 3 advanced tracks: All This Music Must Fade, Ball and Chain, and I Don't Want to Get Wise. Now, when those advanced tracks came out, I did discuss them. I loved All This Music Must Fade, and I'm loving it more as I listen to it. This song is very much an FU to a lot of the recent music lawsuits that we've been seeing. I'm talking the recent Katy Perry versus Flame lawsuit, the recent lawsuits from the Marvin Gaye estate. These are all ridiculously inane lawsuits. Some of you may remember that a while back, a song was released by a popular boy band entitled The Best Song Ever, and its introduction sounded suspiciously like Baba O'Reilly. A lot of people wondered if Pete Townshend was going to file a lawsuit against them, and he didn't. His only response was, "I'm glad to see that they're paying tribute to The Who." In recent interviews regarding this song, Townshend has remarked that the musical palette that we have to work with is so limited already. We don't need a bunch of ridiculous lawsuits making that palette even more narrow, and I agree with him. And that's where that rage comes in. Townsend is clearly enraged by this. And this has definitely fueled this song. But the song is also introspective in that it talks about the impermanence of not just music, but everything we create, no matter how important we think it is. In time, all this music will fade. In time, everything will fade. All things must pass. The song manages to critique a certain aspect of our current culture, but also looks at the bigger picture. The second track, Ball and Chain, an excellent blues rocker. I found out after the fact that this was originally a Pete Townshend solo track. Regardless, I'm glad he's brought it in. Daltrey's vocals add a new element to it that weren't in the previous version. They're both great versions. Including this solo Townshend track definitely contributes more than it takes away. Now, my initial reaction to I Don't Want to Get Wise as an advanced track was a little more tepid. I said it was a pretty good track. It was okay, but nothing really great. I'm happy to say that as time has gone on and I've listened to it more, my opinion on this track has vastly improved. I'm understanding more what it's about. In this track, Townshend looks at both his youth and the youth of The Who, and the youth of most men in general. When we are full of rage, when we're full of piss and vinegar, and we can be rather reckless. And quite frankly, at that age, we don't want to get wise. Yet, in spite of it, life teaches us, and whether we like it or not, if we end up surviving, we become wise. Once again, in this song, there is this combination of both rage tempered by introspection. Now, this brings us to the tracks that were not released in advance. And that is why I didn't rush out this review the day this album came out. I wanted to spend a little bit more time with these tracks and give them a chance to grow on me. Track 4, Detour, to me is just as strong as the previous 3. This is also another good, strong, rockin' number right along the lines of the previous 3 tracks. Now, it's at this point with track 5 that the album cools its jets a little bit with Beads on One String. With Beads on One String, Pete Townshend allows himself to indulge in much more pastoral musical production. This song really feels like a late 80s song. In fact, I would say this song feels like what The Who might have sounded like had they not broken up and continued to record albums. I would say the same holds true for track 6, Hero, Ground Zero. Everything about this song feels like a late 80s song. I feel like this is a really, really good track, but I think that in the late 80s, it would have been a really huge hit. Track number 7, Street Song, is probably one of the more cinematic tracks off this album. It has an epic feel to it. To me, this track feels like it's from a rock opera that never got released and was maybe plucked out of the middle of it. It's at track 8 that we suddenly take a surprising little turn with the song entitled I'll Be Back. I'll Be Back opens sounding like a late 80s R&B ballad. Really pristine production. I know it's not Stevie Wonder on harmonica, but it sure feels like it. This song is a real departure from the rest of the album, and I know that in some reviews I've read, it's gotten some negative critical reaction. I think it's a pretty good track. I'll Be Back feels like it's starting to meander at around the 2-minute mark when suddenly it breaks into this section where the production jumps up a couple notches and Pete Townshend sort of quasi-raps, for lack of a better word. And it's this sudden shift of gears that saves the song from becoming too monotonous. In spite of that last comment, I still think it's a pretty good song. Not a great song, but a pretty good song. And at times it reminds me a little bit of the kind of blue-eyed soul ballad that Elton John would have probably recorded once again in the late 80s or early 90s. This brings us to track 8, entitled Break the News, which is one of my least favorite tracks on this album. It's not a terrible track per se, but it does embrace a lot of contemporary musical cliches as far as how the melody is written. At the time when I first heard it, I thought, well, I guess this track comes the closest to appealing to current modern commercial radio sensibilities. Then I found out, of course, this song was not written by Pete Townshend, but was written by Simon Townshend, who was Pete Townshend's brother. This is followed by Rockin' in Rage, which once again is one of those very small mini epics that Pete Townshend is known for. And this also feels like it was plucked out of some rock opera that Townshend wrote and then set aside. Just like Street Song, it's just got that very cinematic epic feel. And I enjoyed it just as much as I enjoyed Street Song. This is followed by track 11, She Rocked My World, and if you bought the standard edition of this album, this is the last song on the album. Now this Latin tinge number has gotten a certain amount of negative criticism, or reaction I should say, from critics. And a lot of that reaction has had to do with the fact that it is the last song on the first Who album in 13 years. And many critics are kind of befuddled by, why did you close the album with this? I definitely get that criticism, but having said that, I don't dislike this track at all. In fact, I enjoy it a great deal. It's got a very fun, quasi-mysterious, but not taking itself too seriously vibe to it. I think this track is better suited earlier in the track order. Definitely, this album needs a stronger track to end on, and She Rocked My World is not it. It is, however, a fun and enjoyable track. Now, when this album dropped, Tidal, which is my streaming music of choice, only carried the deluxe version, which had 14 tracks, and that's how I listened to it over the weekend. Even though it said deluxe, when I first researched this album prior to its release, I could only find a single CD version and a vinyl version, which would of course replicate what was on the CD. I didn't see that there was any third version, a deluxe version that was longer than its standard counterpart. So when I went out and picked it up physically, I thought I was buying a 14-track version of the album. After listening to it, I found out this version only has 11 tracks. I was not at all happy about this. I don't blame the band, and I'm not going to take it out on the music, but I was not at all happy, and so I went out and had to find the deluxe edition, which has 14 tracks. Yeah, I'm not happy about this. I will probably be getting rid of this very soon, but I wanted to show you the difference so that you don't make the same mistake I did. And I will add that finding this deluxe edition was not easy, actually. Normally, if you go to a service like Amazon and type in a new release, you'll see all the versions there. I had to do some real digging just to find this edition. I didn't buy it from Amazon, though. None of my local stores had it, so I just simply had to order it from a local Target store. So now let's talk about the remaining 3 tracks that are on this deluxe edition. I think I can honestly say that you don't want to bother with the standard edition. The album doesn't feel complete, in my opinion. You really have to get this version. She Rocked My World, like I said before, a strange track to end an album on, especially the last album by The Who in 13 years. Following track 11 on this edition is track 12, This Gun Will Misfire. This Gun Will Misfire is one of the stronger tracks on this album. I would say it's as strong as the album's opening 2 tracks, and would have been a better track to end the so-called standard version on if you weren't going to do this deluxe edition. I can already see where a few people might think that this is some kind of anti-gun song, but quite frankly, I think that's just a metaphor. I think this song is really about people who talk and shoot their mouths off before they consider what it is they're actually saying, and people who try to comment on our current times without the benefit of history and without considering history first, once again, before they shoot their mouths off. In other words, this song is about a lot of people who comment on YouTube. Now, This Gun Will Misfire is followed by track 13, entitled Got Nothing to Prove. This track is a real surprise and a real delight for the ears. This song feels like a really early 60s Who song, and the orchestral arrangement can best be described as, quite simply, shagadelic. I'm going to circle back to this song in a moment because I want to talk about track 14, entitled Danny and My Ponies. Danny and My Ponies is the closing track on the deluxe edition, and for me this song was a real head-scratcher. Like I said earlier, a lot of critics really questioned the track She Rocked My World as a closing for the first album by The Who in 13 years. But She Rocked My World is 100 times better choice than Danny and My Ponies. Now maybe this particular track will grow with me or grow on me in time. I've listened to it numerous times, and quite frankly, this is my least favorite track on this entire album. Danny and My Ponies kind of just borders on being boring, in my opinion, and it seems totally inappropriate to end the album with this. In fact, I think that the perfect song to end this album with was track number 13, Got Nothing to Prove. In fact, its early 60s sonic motif makes it the perfect track to end this album on, especially when you consider that this could very well be The Who's last album ever. The song is about a girl changing a man's life and his attitude on life, but its title, Got Nothing to Prove, seems so appropriate to end this album with. Because Pete Townsend and Daltrey, whether you want to call it The Who or not, they have nothing to prove. They have nothing that they need to prove. I honestly don't know if this album will compare to the very best albums we've heard from The Who during their classic era. It's too early to tell yet. Only time will tell. But this was a solid album. I'm still not 100% sure that I really want to call this The Who, but it sure damn sounds like it. This is TJR. Those are my thoughts on the album. Let me know what you think. What were your favorite tracks? What were your least favorite tracks? Do you agree with what I've said? Do you disagree? If you disagree, please state your case. I want to know what you think. Just keep your comments respectful. Everybody, thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.